Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday, June 29th. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. We have a number of items on our agenda for this afternoon. First, we will be having our second work session on the Safe Streets Act, and so I appreciate everybody returning so that we could pick up this important piece of legislation. And in the few weeks since we have last discussed it, there has been national news that has come out saying that across the United States, more than 7,500 people have been killed while using our roads. And that is a national statistic, and closer to home here in Montgomery County, there have been 283 people who've been injured walking or biking and 7 people who have been killed. Those numbers continue to increase. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why this legislation has been introduced. I once again appreciate the sponsorship of all of my colleagues. I don't know if anyone has any opening comments. No. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. McCartney-Green.
Thank you, Chair Glass, and good afternoon, council members. As mentioned, we had a robust discussion back on March 30th, our first work session, and the committee made several amendments to the bill. I'd like to just review those so that we're on the same page. And I'm looking at page 5 of the staff report. So the committee voted unanimously to expand the traffic infrastructure review to include a collision involving expanding not only for a student but for a pedestrian that's either walking, biking, or using other non-motorized conveyance to or from school that occurs on a county road in a designated school zone or on school property at any time. The committee did make an amendment not to specify during arrival or dismissal, but instead at any time. Second, to clarify verbiage related to county-owned signalized intersections instead of county-controlled signalized sections. We talked about the difference between those in terms of the county having more control. Number 3 was requiring the annual report to include data on referrals made by MC DOT that occur on school property under the jurisdiction of a municipality or state highway. There is language, just so the committee could see. I know we talked about it generally, but there's language in the packet specifically. Number 4 is to modify the requirement of the automated enforcement plan to comply with state law. We did talk about that there's some authorized use of cameras, but not all, and so we're left that more broadly so we can continue to be authorized within that scheme. And number 5 was to clarify that a review must be completed within 6 months after notification of a crash to the County Department of Transportation by law enforcement. There were some outstanding things that the committee still need to discuss for today, and that was talking about access points for LPIs and where those should be. Also looking at other county measures, which includes outreach and education. And then there was an amendment that was offered by Councilmember Friedson, or proposed in a memo provided by Councilmember Friedson, that whether or not the collisions or infrastructure review should occur within 100 feet of a school bus stop. And so with that, I'm happy to jump into the discussion point.
Yeah, let's do that. Although, let me just back up 1 second. As we were talking about, as you were reviewing what was discussed at the last session and the data points, one thing I just want to address at this point, the racial equity and social justice impact statement, which is covered from the previous work session. And I want to be very clear that while the OLO report says that the bill's effectiveness would be indeterminate as it relates to social justice and racial equity, that is absolutely not true. That is a faulty assessment based on information that I'm not aware of, because the reality is here in Montgomery County, Hispanic residents are 121% more likely to end up in an emergency room because of motor vehicle crashes. Asian American Pacific Islander residents are 85% more likely to be hit. Black and African American residents had an emergency room admission rate for motor vehicle crashes 136% higher than the general population. And we know that our equity emphasis areas have a higher concentration of low-income residents and a greater percentage of people who are hit on our roads. That is information not only from county government, but the Council of Governments. And so I just want to call that out at the beginning of this conversation and redirect where help will be going when we pass this legislation. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. McCartney-Green.
Thank you. And so the issues for the committee's discussion is, number one is whether or not to expand the infrastructure review to include collisions within 100 feet of the school bus stop. One of the things that the committee had asked is for MCPS to be able to be here as well, to join the conversation as well. And so invited MCPS, who Brian Hull is here, and others.
If everybody who wants to participate in this conversation can come on down, please. Particularly since the first point of discussion is about MCPS and bus stops. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Mr. Hull, welcome. Ms. McCartney-Green, do you want to?
Right. And so the amendment here is to amend lines 12 through 19. And so in addition to the designated school zone on school property at any time, it would also include within 100 feet of a school bus stop.
Thank you. Mr. Hull, my first question, if we're talking about, and I appreciate Vice President Friedson for introducing this proposal, recognizing that we've had too many of our kids hit while walking to a bus stop or waiting for a bus stop. And so I think to level set this conversation, how many bus stops do we have in the county for MCPS?
Great. Thank you for that question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I've actually brought with us our Director of Transportation, Greg Salois, who will be able to speak in more detail about some of these specific issues. So I'll let him respond to that question if that's okay.
Thank you. Mr. Salois.
Good afternoon. Currently, considering that sometimes it is a high school and middle school or elementary school stop, but approximately 27,000 bus stops within the county.
Say that number again.
27,000.
Is there any repeat counting in that? Because you mentioned high school, middle school.
Correct. I don't have the exact ratio based on it, but it's...
So what you count, so within that 27,000, there might be an intersection in a residential community that is the pickup for elementary school, middle school, high school, and it's counted 3 times, but is the same stop.
Correct.
Got it. So let me ask a different way. How many locations are kids picked up in?
That I can dig into, and it's so I don't have an exact...
Okay.
I mean, we have 1,230 schedules that go out twice a day, and based on, of course, there's a more concentration in the Randolph, West Farm Depot areas versus the Clarksburg, Shady Grove North, simply because of the geography.
Is the 27,000 number, since we've just determined that it might be counted 3 times for the 3 different types of schools, is it counted again in AM and PM in pickup and drop off?
No, no.
Okay, so these are single. So I'll do some quick math and say at a minimum there are at least 9,000 stops if you assume that every stop picked up elementary, middle school, and high school. So a minimum of at least 9,000.
Yeah, I would look at it in between 20 to 25% of an overcount.
Okay, so that number is even greater based on your numbers. Okay. That's a lot of bus stops.
It is.
Would you say that is most of the county?
For the entire county, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair,
let me ask.
I just want to make sure, just to quantify that we're focused on county roads, so if this falls within a municipality or within another jurisdiction, the county, this bill would not have that jurisdiction over there, so it would have to be on a county road and not a municipality or connecting to a state highway.
Fair point. So you assume, based on population throughout the county, that probably about at least a quarter, if not 20% maybe, or actually based on the 7 districts we have, and one of them basically being Rockville and Gaithersburg, you figure probably about 15% are municipalities, within the municipalities. Okay. When there is an incident involving a youth at a bus stop, what actions does MCPS take?
So we're actively involved with the one that happened last month, and we rely heavily on Montgomery County Police, their direction on how anything happens. We're doing a follow-up with the state, and actually I was on a conference call this morning, and we do a full investigation after Montgomery County Police do their investigation, and we do a complete overview or a route review and determine, did the stop location have any impact on the accident, any cause to it, and then if there's nothing to that, was it fault of our staff, our drivers, or anything like that. So there's a complete review that goes into it. Fortunately, it doesn't happen often when it involves, an MCPS school bus. So, and that's the only time that we get involved. If there's any accident or incident involving anything other than an MCPS school bus or MCPS student while they're on the bus, we have no involvement.
How often are bus stops changed?
Rarely, other than if you have a group of middle school students that are going to high school, we'll change it because they're no longer going to be at that stop. As well as we get appeals from residents to change the stop, whether it's on a main road they consider it dangerous, they want a actual house stop instead of a community stop, and we look into that. We physically take out a laminated map, look at it, what our options are, and then we make that decision. If the stop is going to stay, we're going to move it. We had a stop in Bethesda that we moved earlier this year because of some criminal activity going on within the immediate area. So we moved it further into the neighborhood, and there's a little bit more of accountability for the students at the stop.
So population shifts, preferred gathering spot, public safety. When are vehicular incidents factored into any changes in bus stop?
When there's an accident. So we look at it to determine if it was any fault of MCPS school bus, our drivers, or the environment where the stop is.
Can you continue that thinking? Explain to us, after you do that analysis or review, what precipitates an actual change, or not changing, quite frankly.
So an example was right outside of my office on Crabs Branch. A resident asked us to move the stop inside the community. I don't know the name of the development, but right across from our office. And we cannot physically drive the bus in the community just because of the length of the bus, and it would cause an accident. We'd hit a bunch of stuff. And we looked at the stop on Crabs Branch, and we have a pretty lengthy median before the curb, as well as parking along the street, which is an additional barrier for any vehicle to going up onto the curb to hit a student or something like that. So we took all of that into consideration and determined that it was the actual safest location for that bus stop, even though it was right on the street or curb on Crabs Branch. We actually positioned the bus so vehicles cannot exit onto Crabs Branch from the community while the students are loading. And again, you have that barrier from the median as well as the parked vehicles.
Okay, so it sounds to me, I'm looking at the language of the amendment, and where asks or requires a traffic infrastructure review at each collision point. You're saying that MCPS, well, clearly, MCPS does not necessarily do the infrastructure review, but you're saying you do an analysis, and if needed, you change and redirect the bus stops based on that information.
For what we're allowed to as MCPS. And then in the beginning of the year, we had an issue on Belpre Road in front of Argyle Middle School. It's a busy roadway. There's a lot of traffic with parents dropping off and picking up students. And we gave our recommendations or suggestions of improving traffic within the county streets. But that's what we're limited to, is just our suggestions.
I get it.
And then so we adjusted some things on school property, the way the buses queue, and to try to organize that a little bit better. But that's what we're limited to.
This is very helpful. I have additional thoughts regarding this amendment, but I'll invite my colleagues to speak. Councilmember.
Stewart.
Yeah.
No, oh, sorry. Malcolm?
Each of you wanted to speak,
Okay.
so right. We'll do Councilmember Stewart, then Malcolm, and then Ludke.
I just wanted to follow up on what Council President Glass was asking as you determine bus stops. Do you also look at access by sidewalks and whether or not students can, walk along a sidewalk to access the bus stop?
Yeah, so we have the walk-in zones, which are designated as a mile for elementary, mile and a half for middle,
Right.
and 2 miles for high school. However, there may be a student that lives directly across from a high school on Rockville Pike, but we are not going to mandate that student to walk across Rockville Pike. So there will be a bus stop for that community or that group of students to go to the high school, simply because we're not going to have them cross the street. So we determine the safety, the walk path that they have, before we actually eliminate or add a stop.
Right, and when you're looking at the walk path, that includes contiguous sidewalks
Correct.
that they're walking along.
Yeah, and we physically go out there with a wheeled measuring tape and look at it for the walk zones, as well as in that walk zone, is it a continuous sidewalk? Or do they have to cross a major street or cut through a field or however it is? So as long as it's in that walk zone on a continuous safe path, then that's how we make the determination.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Malcolm.
Yes, thank you. One of the fun facts that you shared with me is that you have more schedules than Greyhound. Is that true? Is that
So yeah, my previous life, I was with Greyhound and Bolt Bus for about 13 years. And pre-COVID, Greyhound ran about 1,600 buses in the entire U.S. And in Montgomery County alone, so our fleet size is about 1,460, but we do 1,230 schedules,
Yeah,
twice a day. So
yeah, that's
it's,
pretty crazy.
it's an enormous undertaking.
Yeah, thank you. So can you share the both with you and Director Conklin the relationship? So you are the first people to look at the accident if it's at a bus stop, or are you? I guess the police are the first people to look at it. So at what point, if your review determines that there's an infrastructure issue, and then do you share it with DOT, and what is the back and forth with that? Either one of you.
So the concern's initiated by the county, not us.
Mm-hmm.
If we can change the stop on our own, determining, outside of an accident or something, then we will do it. On a lot of these appeals, we have to deny just because of the fact where it's in the safest spot in our determination for the bus stop. They would have to go further to my chief, to the Brian Hall's office, and then to the county. But
So if the county suggests that this isn't the safest place, can you move the bus stop? And you review and determine that you can't move the bus stop because of all the other parameters. Does it come back to the county to say, okay, if we can't move the bus stop, is there anything that we can do from the infrastructure to make it safer? I mean, is there an interplay there?
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Paler, Chief of Traffic Engineering and Operations, Montgomery County DOT. Typically, when we perform assessments at locations where there have been collisions, we run the gamut of solutions at that time. So one of the solutions could be bus stop relocation. The other solution would be some type of infrastructure modification, or the addition, subtraction, or relocation of a traffic control device. And so whichever one of those particular solutions is the most viable and feasible is the one that we would pursue. So if we did mention that, hey, probably need to relocate the bus stop and that was infeasible. If there is a real solution that could be performed in conjunction with that or aside from that, we would have that as a second measure to look at.
So it sounds like you're already doing, so any collision with a student, you're doing this assessment. Is that correct?
We are. And I can't personally say if we've been in a situation where the county has requested a stop move. I haven't had that chance yet, just my newness in the position. I don't know if that's actually happened.
And pardon me, I believe it's helpful to clarify a couple of things, or at least one. Montgomery County DOT typically does not look at or evaluate a crash unless it gets to a level 4 or 5 serious injury or fatal, and then we would do an evaluation. However, if Montgomery County Public Schools, a resident, council person contacted us and informed us of the situation and mentioned that they believe there was a safety issue there, then we would take that up. But typically, unless there is some outside force that was imposed on us to ask us to review a location, we probably wouldn't, because we don't receive those, we don't receive police reports at that level.
And excuse me, somebody help me with my memory. We're always talking about that police reported crashes, right, or collisions. When we talked about this at the last time, I think that there must be a police report before you review. So it's not just that the school says there was an incident. There has to be a police report first.
No, ma'am, that's not correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we love to get the police report because it provides additional context for our evaluation. But our assessment of a location from a safety perspective is not predicated on receipt of a police report.
I think part of the confusion might be that the data set that we're using to manage Vision Zero is the police reporting data set. So if there are serious or fatal collisions from that data set, we're automatically reviewing it, but it doesn't mean we don't review it if it's brought to our attention through another channel.
Thank you.
And to add to that, so that Michael did a great job kind of talking about the reactive when they get a report, when something comes through on the police reported crash data, but there is the whole proactive side that did come up last time in our work session. So in the packet, the addendum, the new packet, that's what I'm thinking of. Towards the end, there's some extra information. There's an example of a walk shed audit. So you heard Greg mention about the walk sheds. We use the school's designated walk sheds for our safe routes to school infrastructure reviews. They cover about 15 walk sheds a year to do that analysis, and that's a proactive piece where it's looking at the entire walk shed, the sidewalk network, where are the crossing guards currently, where are the ADA ramps, what are the conditions of those. So it's really comprehensive, and that's part of that proactive piece, not just saying, okay, this crash happened, let's do that. It's really taking those entire geography and the crash data and the built environment to really look at those walk sheds and figure out what safety improvements can we make. Sometimes they're small, signing and marking. Some of them are long-term. Even you see in the example report in the packet, it shows and breaks those recommendations out between short, medium, and long-term.
Mm-hmm. And do we know how many collisions each year happen with students either at a bus stop or walking to or from school?
We did some rough math because we also don't have a field just for that in our crash data. Did a rough matching looking at some of the narratives. We got about 6 a year. Six, yeah.
So my feeling is that we should look at them, right? I get that we have the 12,000 schedules, and we have how many walk sheds? I guess however many schools we have. But the number of collisions is small. So if we looked at including the bus stops and the collision and the walk sheds, walk zones, if a collision occurs with a student, apart from, I know last time we decided that within the school zones it should be anyone at any time. I'm considering perhaps at the bus stops and the walk zones, any student involved in a collision during that on their way to school. That's a small number, correct? Yeah.
I mean, I think that suggestion makes sense, and we had been looking at this language saying that if it were related to the time in which that location is actively serving as a school bus stop, then it would be a more reasonable set of investigations to do. Or if the language in the top of the amendment on page 6 adds, using walking, biking, or other non-motorized conveyance to or from school or school bus stop, that would capture the person using the school bus stop, not just anything happening in that piece of the infrastructure.
Just one more. Thank you. My only caveat with that, and we needed to talk about it, is the school zone itself is, there are accidents that happen right around, collisions that happen right around the schools that are not quite in the school zone.
So when I said I had some thoughts, you are
Great.
leading us in the right direction, and it's a safer direction. If you want to put a pin on that.
I'll put a pin on it.
There we go. Councilmember Lutke.
Thank you. So I just had a couple of clarifying questions, and I appreciate everyone's discussions. When you were answering the questions about accidents involving a school bus, and I don't know if I misunderstood, but you said if it wasn't something involving the bus in an accident, but there was an incident on the bus that you don't respond to it in any way, it's not handled by you?
Unless it's specifically an MCPS bus,
Right.
or a bus driver involved, we have no involvement because
I mean for incidents that occur on your bus. Might not be an accident, right? So the bus isn't involved in something with somebody else, but if there's an incident that occurs on the bus, you do respond to that, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So just wanted to make sure that was clear. And for Mr. Paler, not all bus stops are on county roads, right?
That's correct.
And so do we have any idea, and I'm a high user of MCPS bus stops for my family, but this year we're finally getting from 3 pickups and drop-offs a day down to 2 pickups and drop-offs a day. But how many of those thousands of bus stops that you referenced are on county roads?
I don't have the exact data on whether it be a county, state, rural, city. I don't have that. I can get it.
Okay.
It's a little bit of digging, but it's
Yeah.
our geniuses in our routing department can probably get it from very, very quick.
Okay. The only reason I'm asking that is because obviously certain things are within the county's responsibility, and then things you can do, and then certain things rest with the state highway administration, and we got to go to the state. But the students may be waiting at a bus stop and not be involved in an accident that involves the bus itself, but may be hurt because there's an incident with another vehicle. So I think it would be useful to know how many of those are on county roads versus how many of those are on state-controlled roads, because for the families affected and for the kids who are waiting for the bus, it's all the same. But that would help us to better understand that. And then you mentioned the level 4 or 5 serious injury or fatality categorization, and once upon a time when we were trying to figure out at the state level how the school systems would report critical life-threatening incidents, we did struggle with this, and school grounds is what we came up with, things that happen on school grounds, right? And that includes school transportation vehicles either owned by or contracted for by the local school system. But again, a lot of the things that are happening when the person's not on the school bus themselves. They're waiting for the school bus, or they're crossing the crosswalk in the school zone, but it's not school grounds. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about whether, based on the experience and practice that you've seen, whether you think that should be amended to fix that so that the definition encompasses more of those types of incidents that occur because the students are trying to get to school. And related to the going and coming from the school in the areas immediately surrounding our MCPS buildings.
I think that's a good question. I'm not familiar with the definitions that you were working with in the state. The law that was drafted here is not limited to school grounds.
Right.
So it's encompassing municipal, state, or county right-of-way in the school zones, which are the responsibility of whichever of those agencies would be responding to the incident here.
Right.
And the last work session, we had a discussion that the police would be sort of the clearinghouse for collecting the incident data and then providing it to the relevant agency for their response under this. So you're right in that school grounds definition is probably too limiting for what this bill is trying to accomplish.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleagues for these questions. Again, this is why we had this second session specifically to engage further with MCPS, because ultimately we want our kids to be safe. And I appreciate Council Vice President Friedson for introducing this amendment so that kids are safe wherever they are. As I'm listening to colleagues, clearly listening to MCPS and the fact that there are 27,000 bus stops, even if a quarter of them are double counted or triple counted, that brings us to about 21,000 bus stops. That is a vast number, but ultimately the goal is to make our kids safe. And so to Council Member Balcom's point, what I would like to propose, and recognizing that some of these analyses or most of these analyses are already done between MCDOT, the police, and MCPS, what I'd like to recommend instead of adoption of this amendment is offer another amendment that would expand the infrastructure review to include an area that is half a mile beyond the designated school zone, somewhat to Councilmember Luedke's point as well. If the school zone is already half a mile around the school and we want our kids to be safe, then expanding 1/2 mile beyond that. I would like to offer that so that it still focuses on the schools, knowing that the walk sheds for high schoolers is 1 mile. I believe middle school is is a mile, 2 miles for high school.
2 for high school, 1.5 for middle.
1.5 for middle, right, exactly. So this would cover more kids who are walking too, and recognizing, as we've just been told, that when there are incidents at bus stops, as rare as they are, thankfully, but when there are, they are already given thorough review and action is taken, right? So I offer that for consumption.
I think
They're reviewing in real time, but I welcome my colleagues' thoughts first.
I would say pending reaction from staff, I would say that looks like a good direction. I mean, as we've been discussing this, and we discussed last work session, expanding how we're looking at this to make sure that we are capturing the collisions that are happening and reviewing it, I think is the direction I would like us to go in. I had a couple other questions, but I don't want to derail this conversation.
Okay, I appreciate the pause.
Yes, I think it's going in the right direction. But I appreciate the walk audits. I think though that's where we need to get to. But they're just, you can do so few in a year. And I mean, how many did you say? 15? Yeah, that's by the time you get through all the schools, it's going to take a long time. So I think that there's a proactive approach and a reactive approach. The proactive approach is doing the walk audits. The reactive approach is where do we come down with what is the best way to do it when we can. I mean, I'm sure that if you had the resources, you would do all of them all the time, right? I think that makes sense. The 1 mile. But
yeah,
and we're all thinking at the same time, right? In real time. I guess I still think that if there is a collision involving a student on their way to school, regardless of where it is, if it's in the walk zone, if it's at a bus stop, if we're thinking there are only 6 of them, then they, in addition to this, I think that any collision involving any student on their way to school, we should look at that.
Yes, I agree with that. And whenever I am driving home or taking one of the Q buses down Veers Mill Road, and every time I pass Newport Mills, I am reminded of the number of incidents that are student-related and non-student related, speaking to that intersection and that stretch. And yes, I agree with the sentiment and the frustration that that we have to balance between proactive and reactive. Given the resources that we have, we try to be as proactive as we can. And if, God forbid, there's an incident where we have to be reactive, we need to determine the posture in which we react. And this keeps it focused to those school areas so that even those limited resources are best utilized.
Did you want to jump in?
Well, sorry. I guess I'm trying to think, so if we expand it a mile more than what we have.
So it's already half a mile, it would
Right.
go half a mile more. So it
Right.
would be a mile radius around the schools.
But don't we still have a problem with bus stops? Because bus stops could be outside of that radius. I think that's what.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. So I'm trying to
So-
figure out the proposal.
Okay, so I think it's a combination, perhaps. Could we do a mile around the school, anytime, anyone, 1 mile around the school? And in addition to that, do any student on their way to or from school at a bus stop or in the walk shed, in the walk zone?
Been trying to digest the change in the direction that you've been talking about here while you've been discussing it. The bill as you've currently drafted it does not relate to the school walk zones. It's the defined school zones, which are frontages of school property on the road. So the approach you're talking about is dramatically different than what has been referenced before. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just dramatically different. So I'm trying to understand the difference. And you are probably talking about every collision, or nearly every collision, the way that you're currently talking, because the school walk zones overlap, and in the urban and suburban portions of the county, there's going to be very little space other than the school zones.
But I would limit it to students.
And that's
During-
that's yet
Yeah.
another modification to what we had talked about last time, which may then bring that down to a more reasonable set
Right,
of
so it's
investigations.
like
But we don't have analysis of what that implies
two
right now.
pieces. The one piece is the 1 mile around the school, everyone, anytime. And that's what we talked about last time, right?
No. We talked about designated school zones,
Oh, well, I'm
which is
sorry.
a limited area, very limited area.
Right, I'm sorry, you're right.
And also, just to provide more context around this conversation, there was a discussion and there was a public testimony that this should be expanded beyond schools, and it should include libraries and rec centers and all these areas. And the problem that we were working through was resources, and recognizing that is the goal. We want to be able to do that. We don't have the ability right now, so what can we do with what we have? And that is what we're working through right now with the school bus proposal, because that is, on average, an estimate of 21,000 stops. Ideally, yes, we want it. And as we agreed as a committee last session, the more we try to make this just purely countywide, the harder it is to make a meaningful impact anywhere. That's what we're really trying to do.
And
It's-
just to reinforce, the baseline is that these reviews are occurring for serious injury and fatal
Right.
collisions independent of your action on this bill. So we are already focused on where we're having the most serious events and consequences. It's just a question of how many other crashes that don't have those serious consequences, but may be indicative of some problem that could lead to a serious consequence. How much of the available resource for the Vision Zero activity do we dedicate to that versus the places where we know we have these incidents occurring?
So if we, I appreciate that. So if we have 12,000 schedules, but only 6 incidents, then we're not looking at whether there's whether we're covering 12,000 bus stops. We're talking about whether we're covering 6 incidents involving students at the bus stop.
If I can just ask, so there's a lot more involvement than just the isolated accidents. So to Wade's comment earlier, with the walk zone reviews, on an almost daily basis between the depot managers, the cluster managers, the route supervisors, we are looking at the walk zones the safety of them constantly. So we're not limited to that, just that 15 a year. Look at it, it's like we're constantly looking at every single zone almost on a daily basis, you know, based on all the different depots. And if there's any kind of incident, accident involved within a school area, of course I get involved if it's with the bus. However, the CEO's safety and security with MCPS, if there's an assault to a student, again, if there's an accident or a student gets hit by a car, that is all investigated. So collectively, there's a lot more than just those, you know, identifiable 6 incidents that happened throughout the course of the year. It's very, very focused, and there's a lot of communication between my assistant director and Wade as well on the whole Safe Streets process. And so it's there's a lot that happens, you know, on the investigation side with it collectively.
So colleagues, decision time somewhere. So again, recognizing as you have very well done that there were 6 incidents out of, you know, 21,000 stops and 12,000 schedules.
So we do 1,230 twice a day.
Yeah.
If you just do it from the 1,230 for the last fiscal school year, we did 249,780 schedules.
Okay. So what I would recommend is that we expand that school walk zone, the review for that half mile out, and we have all very strongly said that every time, God forbid, there's an incident at these bus stops, you're telling us what your actions are, and you're also telling us that there are sometimes unreported incidents, but council members and others will share, and you will look into those problem areas, and I trust that that will continue, that oversight and the necessary changes should a problem arise. And so I'd move, and I think you already approved the half mile expansion, and we'll leave the bus stops just where they are in terms of the amendment.
In terms of the amendment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay.
I think they need to catch up.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We'll take a moment. Okay. Do you want to address MCPS? Yeah, if you want to go. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Oh, I had a question for MCPS, if you guys want to still confer on that. I just had a question. I know Mr. Holland talked about the 15 walk sheds a year doing that, and Mr. Holland, maybe a question for you and MCPS. But in DC, they just updated and did their Streets for Students Amendment Act in 2022. It takes a much more proactive look at the area around schools and what they're going to recommend is done. And I'm just curious if you're familiar with that, if you have looked at what DC is doing in their pilot programs and what they've started to adopt.
I personally have not. It's a little bit different on the DC side, of course, because special needs are the only students to get transported by bus. Every regular ed student takes Metro.
Okay.
So only bus only transports special needs in DC.
I did not know that. All right. Thank you.
Just condensed city, it's more efficient.
Yeah. Well, I think they're not just looking at bus stops, but that's helpful information. The question we were talking about before is also students who are walking and how they're looking at their school zones and their walk sheds overall. They got quite the larger walk zone. Yeah.
Because everybody's walking our Metro.
Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, anytime there's an incident with one of our students, whether it's on a school bus or when they're walking to school, we are investigating that. So whether it's, you know, an accident where DOT is involved or another situation surrounding the safety of a student walking to school where it would be our safety and security team that would be doing the investigation. But anytime that there is a serious incident with one of our students on the way to school, that is already being investigated by the team.
Great, not my question, but thank you for that. I guess my question was, DC just adopted in 2022 a much more proactive stance towards their school zones, and looking at, and it sounds a little bit like what Mr. Holland, what you were talking about the review of 15 walk sheds a year, but I think DC is doing something a bit more aggressive in terms of what they are proposing in changes to their infrastructure around school zones. So they're looking at requiring high visibility crosswalks at all intersections, more speed bumps, always stop signs, flashing school zone beacons and other things, and they've just begun doing that more proactively in the district. And it's, if you have not had an opportunity to look at that, I just ask that perhaps we can, and if MCPS could take a look at also what they're doing in the district, and Mr. Holland, and maybe it's tangential a little bit to this bill, but I think there is enough overlap there to think about what DC is now doing.
So the thing with the DC Safe Routes, the school bill, from my recollection, maybe incorrect, is that it doesn't say study, it says it was going to require certain aspects. And so what we do with the current watershed assessments is what you're talking about. It's signing, marking, where does there need to be refresh paint, where does the crosswalk need to be moved from, just lines to a continental crosswalk, traffic calming, speed humps, speed cushions, those kinds of things, raised crosswalks. Those are things that are considered for all of those audits proactively.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would just say, let's take a look at what DC is doing, because as you said, they are requiring more things than suggesting them, and since they just put their law in effect in 2022, I think it would be helpful to look at any gains they were able to make. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, colleagues. So that was the first action item.
I just want to make sure we clarify the amendment that was on the floor. And so the amendment is to expand the infrastructure review to include not only the schools designated school zone, but to go beyond a half a mile the school zone as well.
That is correct. So that is the equivalency of a 1 mile radius.
Correct.
Correct.
And what crashes, does that include all crashes or just students who are walking to or from school?
I believe it's for students.
For students, okay.
We talked about the current proposal was anyone, anytime
Oh, that's,
in the
yeah,
school
yeah, yeah,
zone.
that's right,
Yeah,
that's right.
Right.
Thank you, right.
The language in the bill is pedestrian to and
Right.
from school.
That
So
was,
it's not,
that was changed, yeah.
just to be clear, so
That's right.
if we're
So
talking
keep
about
it
a
consistency
school
with
in
that.
downtown Bethesda, it's not every person in downtown Bethesda, it's a crash related to somebody accessing the school. Like Chevy Chase, Bethesda Chevy Chase High School.
That was the intention. Again, there was lots of public input, right, and trying
Right.
to expand and absolutely understand why. The focus had been put on student safety, and we're trying to best determine how to make students safe. And I believe with the intention of this, it's to make sure if there are parents or siblings or others who are accompanying the kids, that they are included in this review too. Councilmember?
I thought that we didn't do that. I thought that we had said anyone, anytime. I thought we had that discussion last time. But
So we did clarify to say a pedestrian that's walking, biking, or non-conveyance to or from school at any time.
Yeah.
And so this amendment would include not only within the school zone, but also a half a mile or a total of a mile from the school frontage to out.
so that would include after-school activities,
Correct, anytime.
those types of things.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I thought we landed in a different place. I'm sorry. When I read that, I didn't zero in on what Director Conklin just mentioned, the to or from school, right? Because the comments from the last work session, I know that was like a long time ago, and a lot's happened between now and then. But if there is if there's a collision, a non-auto collision, in a school zone, regardless of whether it's a half a mile or a mile, it doesn't really matter who is involved, and it doesn't really matter if they're on their way to the school for a school activity, or if they're walking down the road and they get into a collision. It's important to look at the infrastructure, because if the infrastructure isn't safe for that person who may not be walking actually to the school, they might be walking to the park next to the school, it's still important to look at the infrastructure, because tomorrow it might be a student walking to school, or it might be a person walking to after school activities. I think the point that I would be comfortable with is any person, any person, any time in that school zone, regardless of whether they're actually walking to or from the school. I think that's a weird nuance.
So part of the reason this is confusing is that when we were talking about this last time, it was referring to designated school zones, which are, say, 400 feet of frontage of the school. For example, Richard Montgomery High School across the street from us, the school zone is a limited area of Fleet Street. It's not a half-mile, 2-mile radius or anything like that. So with the changes you've been talking about today, you've taken the area of analysis from a very limited space, in which case looking at every collision might be reasonable. And I don't mean that we don't want to look at them anyway, but to a large geographic area where we're going to have many, many more collisions, many of which have nothing to do with the access to and from the school. But for another example, the Bethesda Elementary, Bethesda Chevy Chase,
That
we're
was-
going
I
to
was just gonna
incorporate the
bring that as an
entire
example.
Bethesda CBD
That's right.
in every collision that occurs in there. And it's not that they don't deserve review, it's the resource management and allocation question of that will take resources away from developing the solutions and the more detailed reviews of the serious and fatal collisions and the proactive school walk shed improvement program. So I'm just trying to be clear that it's not a limitless set of resources.
Bethesda
to apply
Elementary
this.
and BCC is the perfect example that covers the entire central business district of downtown Bethesda, right? I share the, for lack of a better word, frustration or angst with not being able to do what we all know we need to do. We are behind the ball here, and we need to act, and it is with the resources as they exist now. How can we deploy those resources to make the most meaningful impact, knowing there is more work to do? That's the important part. It's the unsettling part. I get it.
So here's my compromise. I would rather, if and I understand the resource issue, and I certainly understand the concentric circles. I'm thinking of my schools in my district, and they're not that way, right? I would rather look at every non-auto collision in the school zone than the to and from school a mile out, because it's the issue is the area around the school must be safe. It just must be safe for pedestrians. And so if we're deciding, do we go a mile out but only talk about people who are walking to or from the school, or do we go keep it constrained to the school zone and say any collision that happens? Because if there's a collision that happens right next to the school, it doesn't matter where that person's going.
I think your suggestion is better supported by the data that's going to be provided in the crash reporting, in the incident reports we get from school officials or from the public, because we can identify that's pretty much everything within a defined geography rather than trying to discern the purpose of the person's travel. So I think that is going to be an easier approach to structure than trying to limit the types of trips but in a broader area. So I think I agree with what you're suggesting is a concept that makes this workable. And again, this all started with the school bus stop. If you were to add walking, it's walking, but it's other things, but walking to or from a school or school bus stop with 100 feet, I think that becomes a reasonable set of analytics for us to take on. That limits the types of collisions we're looking at the school bus stop, so that it's not a huge number, and it's the ones that are related to that place being actively used as a school bus stop. I'm just offering that as a way to try to deal with the geographic problems.
Sure.
we're
So
having
it sounds
with this.
like the two proposals that are before us is the proposal I put forward with expanding the school zone by an extra half mile and limit it to individuals commuting, walking, biking, strolling to and from school. And what Councilmember Balcom is proposing is still keeping it in the half-mile radius, but being it inclusive of every incident. Is that fair?
Yes, although I think that, I
it's
think
the
the half
designated
mile,
school
the
zone,
school
which is-
zone,
Right, they're
Not
all
a half
different. Right,
mile.
the school
Right.
zone, keep it to the school zone, right. I welcome Director Conklin, you were just saying that you think keeping it to the school zone and being inclusive of all is better.
I think that's going to be an easier management and analytic task for us to take on, because it is just a crash in that defined space that involves a pedestrian, bicyclist, or non-motorized individual. So that's a known set of data, and we're not trying to discern why the person was there, which the other approach would have to have us know why the person was walking, which is a more difficult thing for us to figure out.
Sure. I still would prefer the proposal I put forward, recognizing that in some of these situations there are other reviews. The police will be brought in to determine the nature of the incident. If an incident happens at 11 p.m. at night because someone was under the influence, that is a very separate type of incident compared to someone walking or biking to or from school during the daytime. And the reason I introduced this proposal at this point was because this part of the legislation is about school safety, and it's about keeping our kids safe. And so I would prefer to keep that the factor.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
disagree.
We disagree.
We have another person here.
Councilmember Stewart.
But let me just say, we sadly had a fatality at one of our schools, just outside the school zone. It's still undetermined. Literally right outside where the sign is. It's possible that it was still in the, that the sign may not have been in the school zone. However, in both of these scenarios, although it's a fatality, so of course you would look at it. But if it weren't a fatality, neither one of these would work, because it would be outside the school zone, so it wouldn't fit my parameter. But the child wasn't going to school, so it wouldn't fit your parameter. So, but I understand that I understand that we have limited resources, so we can't do it all, sadly.
All right, let me make sure I understand what's on the table here. So what is in front of us, what was proposed before, was within the school zone, and it was anyone pretty much at any time, walking, biking.
What's currently proposed on page 6 is anyone walking to or from school at any time. But the point is
Got
that
it.
they're walking
Right.
to or from
Right.
school.
Exactly. And we wanted to take that out.
And in the school zone.
Right, and in the school, right, that's
You're
why,
right.
that was my understanding of reading this. It's not just walking to and from school. When I read this, I thought it meant what we meant last time we met, which was if you're in the school zone, you don't need to be going to the school, but if you're in that zone and something happens and there's a collision, that would be investigated. And that's what's on page 6
That's
right
what's
now.
on page 6. But just remember, the school zone is not the school walk shed. Those
Exactly.
are not the same thing.
And I think that was,
I mean, that's the terminology that you just entered that hadn't been talked about, and I'm trying to expand the school walk shed. That's exactly it.
right.
I have to back up. Upon notification of a collision involving a pedestrian walking, biking, or using any other non-motorized conveyances to or from school, right? So that's currently what's being proposed. I'm saying scratch the to or from school.
But the school zone is a fairly small area.
The school zone is a half a mile, and so during the prior.
No, I think, wait, sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you like that, but I just wanted to, I think the school zone is, what I'm hearing Director Conklin say is actually smaller than a half a mile.
It's designated frontages of the school, generally. A zone on the road in front of the school.
So to give you an example, we looked at, as Chris mentioned, this is something we can analyze pretty easily. We can take the designated school zones and GIS, plot the crashes on them. So we looked at a 5-year period, ignoring the COVID closure years. About 24 pedestrians.
No, Mr. Hall, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I need to get this clarified.
Okay.
So before we get into the data, please define the school zone as well as, and then, yeah, just
So
what are
the
we talking
two
about?
types of geographies, three actually. We've been talking about 3 different types of geographies. One is the school zone, which is a designated area on the street or streets facing the school. So it's a limited geography, and it's generally where the lower speed limit applies for the school. Just for context, when you see the flashing lights, that's generally the school zone.
Right.
The second area that we've been talking about is the school walk shed, which is a distance from the school, barring interruption by major roads or other things that change the shape of those facilities. And then Council President Glass had introduced the third concept, which was sort of an area of influence of the school, a radius from the school itself, is the area in which these reviews would occur. 2 of these are mapped. 1 is not yet mapped, but it's just a concentric circle around the school. So, and the other concepts you've been talking about is which people involved in the crash are you worried about?
So I believe what I would like to see is, and what I think my understanding was without having a clear understanding of school zone, is within the walk shed of a school, any collision, any time involving anyone be looked at.
So I understand the desire to do that, and my only
Your
statement
concern
is
is?
that is pretty much every collision. Given we have up to a 2.5-mile school walk shed that overlap, and it's going to cover essentially the entire urban, suburban
Yeah,
portion of
and
the
that
county.
was, okay. That's the issue.
That's it. That is the ideal.
Yep.
I say it again, the third time this afternoon. That is the hope. But given the resources that we have, it would make it very difficult to achieve that. And so that's why I'm expanding the walk shed and still keeping the focus on our kids and those who are accompanying them to and from school.
Right. But what I hear from Director Conklin is expanding into this third area of influence, it gets difficult then deciding where somebody was going and
Well-
whether or not that should be investigated.
It's not something we always know and may not know.
Right.
And it's not a data field we've tracked. The purpose of the trip is not in the
Right.
data fields for the crashes.
And Councilmember Balcom, I apologize if I'm going back to an idea you had before, but it took me a while
You
to
can
get
have
there.
the idea if you agree with me.
No. So, if we said in the walk zone, anyone, anytime, anything happens, we investigate it. And then in the walk shed, we look at collisions. This is just going back to it.
Expanding the walk shed,
right.
but keeping it limited to.
Yeah.
So,
Is that what you said?
Students on their way
Right.
to and
to-
from
I-
school.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you said before? I thank you. I needed.
so you're looking to do sort of both, is what you're suggesting?
Yes, and I think that's where Councilmember Balcom started.
Right, because the second part of that, so if we kept it as the walk zone, the school zone, anybody, anytime, anywhere, doing whatever, right, in the walk zone, plus any student on their way to or from school in the walk shed. I don't know if it's, do you call it the walk shed or the walk
It's
zone?
called the walk shed.
Shed.
With the walk shed.
Yeah.
Because that's only like 6 people, right? 6 incidences.
So no, that's
No.
so the 6 number is only if it's right at a bus stop, like in the narrative,
I'm
they said
sorry.
bus stops.
Okay.
Like within the school walk zone, I think this is in the packet on page. So much paper. Circle A23 at the very end. We did look at some various scenarios depending on how this bill would go. If we look at all county government maintained roadways, MCPS property, within a half mile, and this is only for students ages 6 to 19, that'd be about 22 a year. So if you add the adults into that, you're looking probably 40, 50 a year.
I mean, the notion that if somebody is hit during the day and we can't determine where they're going means either they've been killed and we need to look at that immediately, or we haven't asked them. Those are the options. So I don't believe discerning someone's intent while walking or biking is an impediment to expanding the walk shed.
I'm sorry, I have to go back to if a student is walking to or from school in an area that we have determined is a safe route to school, and there's a collision involving a student, we should look at that infrastructure. We should review that incident.
We all agree on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if it's student, then it's probably easier to discern. It's just when you include others in that and try to figure out their intent, it becomes very
Right.
difficult.
So my proposal is in the school zone. I'm sure this is way more difficult than we could have gone easier way.
Can I summarize the options, or you want to just restate your proposal?
Let me restate my proposal. So in the school zone, any non-vehicular collision, anytime, anyone within the school zone, collision should be reviewed. Any student on their way to or from school in the designated walk shed should be reviewed.
That is the melding of both. Is that workable?
We would have to go back and see. I don't have that kind of scenario laid out. Because again, the more time we spend chasing crashes, we're not getting that proactive piece. So we'd have to look into that.
Although in my opinion, of course you're the traffic engineers, not me, but so it is reactive, and we're looking at the crash. But if it's we could be proactively avoiding a much serious crash in the future. We could be proactively avoiding a fatality by looking at the infrastructure.
That's the intention of all of this. Yes, correct.
I don't know when you think you're moving us beyond committee, but we can certainly look and see how we would structure the data process for those collisions in the walk shed. The other ones are geographically isolated, so that's easy for us to do. But we can figure out what that looks like and get you that information.
So I'm comfortable with that compromise, right? Because it does get us further in the direction we need to go. I will state that I have capacity concerns, and if I had to personally pick between the two, I would personally prefer to expand the walk shed and make sure that our kids and families that are going to and from school are safer, and that we have that thorough review. Because if there are other incidents within the school zones, those will be picked up and reviewed as normally occur. So I'm okay with this, with feedback. If we want to agree to this, and at full council, you can share with us what your assessment is, but we can revisit.
Yeah, I'd like to revisit. I guess this was very confusing today, and I appreciate your patience and walking us through this. But I'm good with what Councilmember Balcom suggested. I agree with Council President Glass on the intent, and I want to figure out, where we land when we get this to full council. So,
Councilmember Lutke, you've been listening. Any comments? You're good. You're here for the next hearing. I know.
I'm here for the next
and there's a
thing.
number of people who are here for the Air Park
But I
conversation
promise,
as well.
I promise when they come to full council, I'm going to pretend like I'm hearing it for the first time.
No, don't do that.
Don't do that. Okay. Ms. McCartney Green, you got our intention?
I do have it there.
Very good.
Councilmember.
Thank you.
Moving on, number 2 is to clarify that the LPIs that must be installed within certain feet of a school, park, rail, bus rapid transit, library, or community center. When we discussed this amendment last work session, there was much discussion about having that LPI within a block. And then we talked about up county and down county and how a block is definitely different depending on where you are in the county. After that, council staff had a chance to meet with parking planning, who made some recommendations, including suggesting to make that LPI within 1,300 feet. I think planning can probably do more explanation there.
Sure, happy to. Eli Glacier, for the record, transportation planner with Park and Planning. Yeah, our thought about sort of defining, changing the definition from 1 block to 1,300 feet is that this is really the generally accepted minimum spacing standard in the Complete Streets Design Guide for boulevards, neighborhood connectors, area connectors, and other streets like that. So it's essentially the maximum intersection spacing we would hope to see. I think the legislation as amended would say the closest intersection within 1,300 feet in each direction around the access points to those destinations. So it's not every intersection, it's the closest in every direction to sort of cut down on the scope. And I think the packet has a count based on 1,300 feet of how many signalized intersections we're talking about outside of the downtowns and town centers that are already covered by the legislation. Thanks.
Very good. I think that's without objection. Although I do want to just state that in reading some of the supplemental information, there is something, I think it's Mr. Holland who noted just some of the minimal effects and the fact that this bill is estimated to have minimal impacts on serious or fatal crashes. And to this point, I just want to state that having increased LPI, we know that here in Montgomery County we have the largest aging population in the entire DC region. And as we talk about residents being able to age in place and walk around, we want them to be able to safely cross our streets and safely walk in our communities. And our own data here states that LPIs can lower pedestrian safety injury crashes by more than 13%. We know that 66% of pedestrians and 72% of bicyclists are struck at intersections. That's why we're focused on intersections. That's why we're focused on increasing the LPI, and that's why we're focused on banning turning on reds as well. And so there is an important impact that will be made. And so I don't hear any objection. We'll adopt that amendment.
Moving along, number 3 on page 7, the question was whether or not to provide an exemption provision for DOT in terms of having some discretion on a case-by-case basis on whether to install a no right turn on red or an LPI or provide any other alternative. And so council staff provided language here amending line 80 that the requirements of that would require no right turn on red or LPI would be exempt if it would cause a significantly impair public safety. And along with that was accompanying that is an annual reporting. And so as a part of that, DOT would provide in the annual reporting after the effective date of this bill any rationale or evaluation for why that the LPI or no right turn on red signage would be exempt. And then the committee also discussed just the number of referrals. So there might be some intersections where they don't have jurisdiction. And so committee mentioned that they would like to see a number of referrals for recommendations made by the department to a municipality or the State Highway Administration. And so that's there on page 7, listing the language there that would be required.
I appreciate the sentiment, and clearly I think there should be some discretion on a case-by-case basis. My general sentiment is a lot of these problems are engineering problems, so to allow the engineers to try and work our way out of it is a double-edged sword. that as long as we have engineers whose mindset is one of making progress and making improvements as opposed to reflexively going back to what might have been taught a decade, two, or more in school, I'm okay with that and giving DOT that discretion.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think it makes sense for the engineers to be able to look at the intersection. And what gives me comfort is the annual reporting. So if we get down a year or two down the road and there are significantly more rejections than we had anticipated, then we can look at that. So I feel good with that.
Yeah, I like this. Oh, sorry, Dr. Coughlin, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to reference that the reporting is also related to the school safety components we just talked about, where MCDOT would then be asking the partner agencies to follow up on those investigations. That's all.
Great. Yeah, no, I just want to say I appreciate the revised language, and based on the conversation we had the last time, is to make sure that we want something to happen at these intersections or places where there are collisions, and suggesting the signalization and other things, but if you all are looking at that and saying something else should be done, instead we need to be open to that. So I'm comfortable with this.
Right. Very good. Unanimous.
Page 8, and so one of the other amendments suggested by DOT was to include a holistic approach that includes outreach and education. So initially, the contents of the traffic review requires identifying any deficiencies in engineering, traffic control, and traffic operations, and also looking at corrective actions and crash reductions. The committee did discuss whether or not it should include safety outreach and education, and did emphasize that the purpose of this bill was strictly to focus on infrastructure review. Council staff took a step back and also looked at the safe system and just looked at the collective approach, and looking at Mr. Holland's information he provided, that it is a holistic approach. And so one of the best ways was to do this, as from an amendment standpoint, was to kind of quantify. And so on page 8, the review would first primarily identify the deficiencies, and then secondarily, if warranted, the department could make recommendations to outreach and education programs.
I'm good. Good with that.
With that, it's not in your packet, but I do want to consider, I did take a look at some of the amendments that DOT would recommend, and just looking at the Safe Schools to Route program, whether or not to amend the title from a traffic infrastructure review to actually say Safe School Routes Review, and that's just something for the committee to consider. And when I mean changing the title, looking at the actual legislation, it's line 5, and instead of that being traffic infrastructure, it would say Safe School Routes to School Review, and that's just preference. Either way still means the same thing, and the content of the bill is still preserved.
Is there a preference from the administration or anyone else?
Administration was supportive of that. Not sure if Dr. Clompins changed his mind.
No, whatever titling you think is appropriate. I mean, the bill contains elements of speed, which are covered already, and then the doesn't really cover the LPI or no turn on red component, and the traffic infrastructure review is probably not the best title for the work in the school zones related to safe access to schools. So Ms. McCartney Green's recommendation makes sense to me.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. And so just looking at the bill text itself, and on circle page 3, and so line 5, section 319A has speed monitoring systems, semicolon, traffic infrastructure review. My recommendation here is to change that to say Safe School Routes Review. And so including line 20, contents of it would be amended to say Safe Routes to School Review. And that was making it consistent with the program that's already with the county, and that it's more identifiable of what that review is for.
Yeah, I think that's good language. Thank you.
That concludes Bill 1123. Need a recommendation?
Can I say one thing? Sorry.
Yeah.
If we're at the conclusion of this, I just want to say thank you to the Department of, to DOT for installing the flexi posts on Chesapeake and Chicago. This is really important for the community there, and I can't tell you the outpouring of thanks I've received, and especially as we're talking about this bill, parents worried about the school bus that was there and everything else. So I just wanted to publicly thank you for that. And Mr. Paler, thank you so much for doing that. People just kept emailing us and stopping by when we tabled this weekend to thank us for it. So you did the work, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. We really appreciate that.
Go ahead.
I thought you were going to say thank you so much for enduring this session. So thank you for doing that. Thank you.
I appreciate everybody's work. Clearly, most of today's conversation was focused on MCPS, which is where we left off last time. So thank you for MCPS for participating and the candor and sharing with us your thought processes. An observation from my point, I still think that there is more coordination and work that needs to be done between the office of the Vision Zero coordinator and the Department of Transportation. I will say, observationally, I think the relationship could be better served well if they were housed in the same department, rather than being an independent office, because we're talking about the engineering, we're talking about the implementation, and so that is something that I share, and in reviewing the testimony and seeing some discordant thoughts as well, but ultimately we are all here because we want to make our streets safer for every single person, and we all have to work as a team to accomplish that. So I end with those closing thoughts, and thank you all for your participation today, and look forward to the continued conversation at full council.
And we do have a recommendation. Just make sure that was clear for the record.
Yes. Thank you.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now on to agenda item number 2, which is Bill 2423, Air Park Community Advisory Committee established. Before I turn it over to Ms. Wellens, I will turn it over to the bill sponsor if she has any comments she'd like to make.
Sure. Yeah,
You don't
I guess
have
so. No, I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you. And so this bill was introduced and has been co-sponsored by you, Councilmember Glass, and Council Members Jawando, Albornoz, Sales, and Katz. Based on the testimony we had at the public hearing and ongoing discussions, we do have some amendments to go through for your consideration and to discuss, and I will turn it back to you so that Ms. Wellens can walk us through everything.
Okay, and we're joined by Ms. Wellens and Mr. Miller. Welcome. Ms. Wellens.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. This bill, as was noted, had a robust public hearing in which the testimony was supportive, but various amendments were discussed, and Councilmember Lukey has put forward several amendments to address issues that were brought up at the public hearing, beginning on page 4 of the staff memorandum. You can see the various potential amendments laid out for your consideration. The first 2 amendments deal with membership. One amendment would be to, and just to give a little more context there, this advisory committee would consist of a number of voting and some non-voting members. There would be 8 voting members And among those, as originally drafted, 3 of those members would have been nominated by homeowners associations, civic associations, or community groups, other than from the Montgomery Village Foundation, which has separately would have its own member, and that would not change. But the amendment would be to change the 3 members who would be nominated by the homeowners associations, change that to 3 members who reside within a 3-mile radius of the air park, including at least 1 member who resides east of the air park and at least 1 member who resides west of the air park. That would be the first amendment for your consideration.
And to add to that, there's a couple of different ways to deal with this in terms of the radius, and there were some questions raised, and we had feedback from residents asking, could it be instead of 3 mile, 5 mile? So that's something for you to consider. The other piece with the at least 1 from the east and 1 from the west could also just be phrased as geographic diversity within a X mile radius of, in order to encompass that we don't want everybody from one side or the other of the air park.
I think it makes sense to explicitly state geographic diversity in the makeup of the board without being too prescriptive, if that's the way to think about it. So amendment number 1, that's where we are?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. I'm good with it. Yep. We're all good with it.
Okay, great. And with that adjustment,
Right.
that instead of saying 1 member to the east, 1 to the west,
Yep.
we'll
Yeah,
replace
yeah.
that with geographic
Mm-hmm.
diversity.
Yep.
Okay, great. Amendment number 2 for your consideration also deals with membership. And as you'll recall, there was public testimony suggesting that pilots should be represented in this advisory committee, as well as owners and operators of businesses other than flight schools. So you can see at the bottom, starting at the bottom of page 4, this proposed amendment, it would indicate that there would be 2 members who are pilots who use the air park, who represent owners or operators of businesses other than flight schools located at the air park, or who represent owners or operators of aviation-related businesses other than flight schools located within a 3-mile radius of the air park.
And for that one, and I'm assuming since you were okay with amendment number 1 as is, you did not wish to switch from 3 to 5 miles, you were going to keep it at 3 miles. So this would be consistent with that. It mentions a 3-mile radius of the air park.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Unanimous?
Moving to issue number 2 of the staff memorandum, and we're on page 5. The next potential amendment for your consideration relates to the reporting requirements that the advisory committee would have to meet. There would be an annual reporting requirement, and the amendment would be to add a couple of additional items under the required reporting. It would require reporting on data on local flight operations, including touch and go operations, which were discussed as being a source of disturbance by some members of the public who testified. And I apologize, I'm having a little trouble seeing my double underlines versus single underlines. So, and then in addition, the other addition to the reporting requirements would be requiring reporting on facility improvement plans or recommended changes to the airport layout plan.
I think those are both important additions. Again, the whole purpose of this committee is to review the full operations, and we want the full operations. So.
And I think, yeah, Councilmember Balcom, I know, has spoken to me about this, and so I did want to address, and I'm sure Mr. Miller, and thank you for being here, and I really appreciate all the ongoing discussions and work on this to make sure that we have a place and space for these conversations, and that everybody's clear that, you know, this isn't, we don't have local authority over the operations of this air park. It belongs with the FAA because it is a general aviation airport. But there are some concerns about the data and how much we can have it or what we can do with it. So, you know, the number of itinerant flight operations is something that is available. Is that correct?
Yes, for the record, Keith Miller, CEO of the Revenue Authority. Yes, so for clarity though, the information we currently have right now is done by the Maryland Aviation Administration. There is a traffic study that is done every 2 years. It does not count every aircraft that takes off and lands. It's based on a quarterly sampling.
It's an estimate, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and so it is, and so the data then that lies within that, which is how many itinerant flights and things of that nature, is purely just an estimate based on local knowledge of operations. There's nothing factual there as far as the number of flights. I just want to make sure we're clear and on the same page on that.
Within the flight school operations, it would be possible to know how many students are being served by each flight school, would it not? I'm trying to brainstorm how we're not, how to not mandate data collection for data that isn't knowable by those who are there.
Right.
But also to say, what can we use as a proxy for informing the use that is being made of the air park? Does
Yes.
that make sense?
I understand the questioning. So then the questioning really comes down to, we don't collect that data.
Right.
Is the committee going to reach out to the flight schools, and then if the flight schools don't give that data, how does the...
It gets put as a 0 and they get marked as non-cooperative. That's okay. I don't mind that.
Yeah, I'm just asking for clarity on the process.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, as far as the committee goes, we don't, I
Right.
just want to be clear, the Revenue Authority doesn't have that data. And so then it would be, as I read this, it would be the obligation of the committee, not the Revenue Authority,
Correct.
to do these reports.
Correct. And to the extent that someone's not cooperative, it's free to be put in the report. That's part of informing us in our duties. It's part of informing the public and part of informing the county executive. So,
Picking up on that, is there nothing compelling us or the Revenue Authority and its contracts with some of these flight schools to require them to provide this information?
So the contracts themselves go back to a master lease agreement that was done in 1960. And so that we got to adhere to the terms of that agreement. All of the flight schools are subleases to that agreement, so we don't have direct access to those. They're not with us, they are with the master lease agreement. So that's the issue that you're raising. Is exactly right. I'm at a wall, right? The Revenue Authority is at a wall. We can go to the contract that we have, which, as I said, is in place from 1960, and so, underneath that is all the subleases. That's the frustration. But I have to talk to our attorneys and see and review that and see what we can or can't do. But
you see it on my face. I got thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different conversation.
Correct.
And I suspect we can have that conversation at the Economic Development Committee, perhaps reviewing, or a joint committee or something. Sure. But I'm intrigued about a master lease from the 1960s prohibiting us from having some fruitful conversations in 2023.
Correct. Yes. I think conversations can happen. It's just
informed conversations. Informed. Okay.
Right, and I think the greater question is, what information should and could be shared with the public, right? Because there are legitimate community concerns. We also recognize the value of the air park and what it brings, but it's to everyone's benefit. The flight school operators, the Revenue Authority, the community members, the business development community, to get on the same sheet of music about what is, what isn't, what's happening, what's not, and what's possible and what's not. And so, to the extent that everyone can find a way to work together to get that to happen is good. You're right, the Maryland Aviation Administration does have that every 2 years report. But this is something that, frankly, in the past, the county has had to expend money on with respect to Reagan National Airport after ongoing battles back and forth over flight patterns related, around the Potomac River. So, when you're talking about the government, the county government expending money to dig, to find, to do the studies with consultants versus what can we try to get collaboratively and not be at the expense of the taxpayers, I think, we have an incentive as policymakers and as fiscal stewards of county revenue to try and make sure we're doing the best we can without expending outside funding to try and get to the same types of information.
So if I may, that just for clarity, we continue to look at resources that we can do that would provide more and more data. That's what we continue to do. We are having conversations, and I have had conversations in regards to that. My concern in reading this is that, in essence, I guess I'm looking for clarity. If the language is in here, it's the job of the committee to get
Correct.
The information. It's not the job of the Revenue Authority. However, is that clear? I'm trying to understand. I want to make sure that I understand that, because
right. So it is the committee's report. There are multiple members of the committee, some of whom are ex officio, like the Revenue Authority or the county executive or the county council. So the obtaining of the information should be a collaborative effort. It gets put in the committee as the public body's report, but that's the question of whether some of the folks from whom the data would need to be shared to the committee are obstinate about it, then that's something that should be made known.
So just to go along that thought, if I could, a little further, is, and to be clear again, if the Revenue Authority has the data, the council sees it, the public sees it, we share the data that we have. So that I'm not going, please don't misinterpret that, right? If we have the data, it's shared.
Right.
However, if we don't have the data and it's not shared, how is the committee going to get the data? That's what I'm. Do you understand?
I do understand. Yes, and so then but like as I'm saying, the committee can ask. They can leverage the ex officio members who are on the committee to attempt to get cooperation and collaboration. But at the end of the day, if the answer is they're not going to give it, then the public needs to know who's not being cooperative. And I'm not saying it's the Revenue Authority, but that happens. That happens, frankly, even when things are mandated, like in state law, that a data collection must happen, and there's always somebody who says, I don't want to give you my stuff.
So going along that thought basis, if I may, if the Revenue Authority handles the noise complaint system and we have that data, and the Revenue Authority has the flight operations, it's the data that we either get through the state or maybe this new system that we're going to come out with, why would it be the responsibility of the committee? Why wouldn't that just be removed, because the Revenue Authority shares that data anyway? Why would it be the responsibility of the committee to develop that data? I'm just trying to make sure that we're not bringing up two different things here.
It wouldn't be the committee that's developing the data. It's the committee that is packaging it together along with those other things, those recommendations regarding flight operations, safety, community impact, and other community concerns. It's a clean way to have the information all in one place. Does that make better sense?
Well, yeah. So the Revenue Authority is going to continue to share, and then the council is going to get it from a second source in this committee.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the redundancy. I'm sorry if I'm out of line. I'm just trying to understand.
If I may, council member, perhaps I can ask it this way.
Yes.
Mr. Miller, if the committee requests information that the Revenue Authority has on the operations of the air park, will the Revenue Authority provide that information to the committee?
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay. So,
thank you.
Okay. That's fine. I'm sorry.
Councilmember Balcom.
Yes, thank you. So several concerns. I do appreciate that the activity of the air park has increased significantly in terms of the touch and goes from over the 10-year period of time. Is that?
That is, nobody can validate that. There is no absolute data that shows that it increased at all.
Okay. I guess there is a perception of that, and
Yes.
the community has made that perception, has
That is correct.
made that statement. So I understand that there's frustration in the community about this. My concern about the report and the duties of the committee is that we're setting up an expectation of authority, some level of authority that the committee doesn't have. And so I don't want to set the committee up for failure in that in the jurisdiction of the council doesn't have jurisdiction to tell the flight operations, the vendors, we don't have the jurisdiction to tell for them to give us this data. And so I guess the committee can ask for that data. If they choose not to give it, to me, it's not a matter of them being obstinate or them not wanting to cooperate. We don't have the jurisdiction to request that. And so I think that that's an area where I don't want to have an antagonistic relationship between the committee and these operators when they have a contract that they have a subcontract with the people that that you have a contract with. Mm-hmm. So I'm just concerned about the jurisdiction of the council to ask for this data, to ask the committee to ask for this data. I think it sets up the committee for potential failure, or to set up the committee that the committee somehow feels like they are owed this data.
Well, I think, one easy fix to make clear that the committee does not have oversight authority over either the revenue authority or the air park operations is to add a line that specifically and explicitly states that in the bill. To the extent that sometimes our boards, committees, and commissions think their authority is beyond what we ask them to do and beyond merely advisory, that's totally something I'm amenable to doing. But at the end of the day, when you have all the same people at the table and there's the issue of the noise complaints, it benefits knowing how many of the operations there actually are, or to the best of anyone's ability, so that you can have a productive conversation, just like to know whether or not the complaints are coming from one particular neighborhood versus another, or a particular set of homeowners versus the whole area. That's relevant information.
And I totally agree with you. And to go back to what Council President was alluding to at the beginning of the discussion, I think that's a discussion between the council and the revenue authority, and going back to the revenue authority's original contract, and how does the revenue authority have more oversight or more authority in that relationship. I agree with that. I think that that's something that that I would be interested in, having that data and knowing that data, and working with the revenue authority to see if changes can be made. My concern is the bill that we have in front of us right now, and what we're asking the committee to do. That's my issue.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if it's in the language, report annually to the county executive, county council, and the revenue authority, because it does, I think when we say report annually, it sounds like the committee itself is, I think the concern was compiling data and doing this kind of report where they don't necessarily have, well, they don't have the authority for any of it. So I'm wondering if Councilmember Lukey, you'd be open to thinking of possibly different language than report annually to, and this is not perfect because I hate doing wordsmithing from the dais, but maybe something that's like, working with the interested parties to bring together information, like, so it's it's not, it doesn't seem as official as reporting.
Yeah, the intent was for it to be a written report.
Yeah.
That's what was intended, so that the public body votes on what to do. So there may be 3 people who want one thing and 5 of the voting members say no, and this is the recommendation we want to make to the council and the executive. And that's what we want to empower the public members who are participating in the public body to be able to do and to say.
And
it's advisory only.
Yeah,
But
that's where when the way you were just saying that, that's where I got concerned. Is that they're giving a report of what they want done, but if those things, I know there's language in another
Right.
amendment, but yeah, that's a concern for us, is because we have obligations and we have federal laws that we're dealing
Absolutely.
with here that we cannot. So as the committee.
That's the next
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah, that's the next point. And recognizing and respecting that sometimes these things are going to, you can ask for 10 items for Christmas on your wish list, but it doesn't mean you're going to get them, right? And we fully respect the federal authority that governs the air park's operations. That's not at all questioned in any way, shape, or form. I think Ms.
Oh, I'm
Mullins
sorry.
wants
I
to-
just had one thought for consideration regarding the data, which would be potentially wordsmithing from the table here. Like if you just added the term available before data, might
Sure.
add a little more context to the fact that the data might not be available if we don't
Right.
have individuals who are willing to share their data.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm fine with it.
On the last bullet, and I know this one is new, is the facility improvement plans and recommendations and changes to the airport. That particular item is part of our CIP process. Everything that we do at the airport goes to the CIP process, which we bring to the Econ Committee. It gets reviewed by the Econ Committee and goes through a full vote of the council. However, this again, it's this. I understand what you're saying is that they can make the recommendation, but it doesn't mean they're going to get it. And, that our facility improvement plan and the buildings that we do at the airport, that process has a direct impact on our grant assurances. And again,
Sure.
I can't jeopardize putting the Revenue Authority in a position that this recommendation is going to be made, somehow the council is going to accept it, and then we're going to get in trouble from the FAA, from our grant assurances. That's the fine line, and that's my
So,
concern
yeah.
in my language. That's
Absolutely, and I know you and I have spoken
Yeah.
about the grant assurances and the legal requirements, and I believe Ms. Wellens sent
Yeah.
you an email response that mirrored what I had spoken to you about as well. So it's always nice to know that legal advice can be consistent. But that doesn't change that at all.
Okay.
And so it's no different than if you received 20 letters from members of the public inquiring on the same topic and they copied their council member and we received them. It still doesn't mean that that's what you bring to the Econ Committee, but it still allows the council to inquire about it, and to the extent that it is not something that is feasible because of the grant restrictions, that's the answer to that.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't be permitted to say it, permitted to share it, and for folks to noodle it over and have that conversation
Right.
in front of the council or in front of the committee about that.
I was just going to say that goes back to the conversation of what Delegate Balcom and Stewart just raised, is maybe some of that language is what's given pause in the annual report and stuff.
So let me jump in, Mr. Miller. I hear and I feel the consternation and the concern. Let me assure you by saying that the county has over 90 boards, committees, and commissions. I've served on a number myself before getting to the council. Lots of opinions among the hundreds of people who volunteer their time. Those recommendations come to us. They come to the agencies and departments that they help provide guidance to. And this is just one more in which residents and stakeholders would be providing the council with their thoughts. And you have 2 members of the Economic Development Committee who are also here.
Right.
And so the concerns that you raise or the perspectives that you bring, we will certainly engage in that conversation. Right. And so, I think my general perspective is residential input is good. Setting expectations is important. And in the very first line, there is an Air Park Community Advisory Committee. Committee. I'll say that one more time.
Yes.
Advisory Committee. And we want as much information as possible, so I appreciate the amendment, the wordsmithing to make sure that that information is available, and to the point that we've all been alluding to or stating explicitly, if there is information at some point in time that is unavailable, we'll have a subsequent conversation about how we get that information and have our residents be informed of the operations that are taking place literally in their backyard.
Yes, and just so that you know, as I stated on record, we are in support of this bill. I just want to make sure there's clarity. That's all. We've got
an legislative work session.
Yes, we've got an obligation.
Yes.
That's it.
So. So I think we're okay with this?
Yep.
Okay.
The final point, issue number 4 of the staff memorandum, and we're at the bottom of page 5, beginning of page 6. This would be an amendment continuing upon our discussion about the authorities, the Revenue Authority. This would be an amendment to clarify that this section must not be construed to impose any funding obligation on the Revenue Authority, prevent the Revenue Authority from meeting a state or federal grant requirement, or affect the authority or obligation of the Revenue Authority to comply with state or federal law. I will just be frank, this is not a necessary amendment. However, I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable with it, and if it provides greater comfort and clarity, that's great.
This is just an assurance. It's already baked in.
Setting expectations.
No,
No, that's important.
Correct.
Yeah, I get it.
Yep.
Yes, it was perfect.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm okay.
Good.
Yep.
That's it in a nutshell.
I hate to go back to Amendment 1, but the geographical area, I know you guys made a change there and did that. We talked about the west side, east side. The only point of clarity that Councilmember Lukey and we discussed was, if the committee remembers, the original development around the airport, there was nobody there. And so the original development and land use policies, okay, the flight pattern was formed in 1972, which is a right-hand pattern. And so that meant that everybody basically on the west side, it's not direct west, but basically everybody on the west side of the airport since 1972 has never had a plane fly over their home. They're aware of that if they do their research when they buy their homes and so on and so forth. When we raised this and we had this discussion, that was the point that I thought was important, is that you need a voice from that group of homeowners on this committee. Otherwise, this committee can make a recommendation to put the flight pattern over their homes, and they should have it. And that's, so I understand you guys made a change. I'm not sure how that impacts that, but I just felt strong enough that I wanted to just bring that up.
Yeah, the change we made and agreed to today ensures that we have that, so that a group of people on one side can't say, move it over there, and then they had no voice at the table. So that'll fix it.
Thank you.
And I'll add to that as well that when residents or interested parties apply to serve on this, it will be approved by the council.
Right.
We will make sure that there is geographic diversity and diversity in other respects as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
So we've worked through this. I think we're unanimous in supporting, so we'll support as amended.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Ms. Welland. Thank you, Councilmember Lutke. You can stick around for the next one, too?
Sewers. We get everything.
Above land, below land. Come on.
Sidewalks, sidewalks, and sewers.
All the cool kids.
All the cool kids.
Okay. So the third item on the agenda this afternoon is a briefing and work session on the Maryland Department of the Environment action regarding the county's 10-year comprehensive water supply and sewage systems plan for 2022 to 2031 and the denial of various category change requests. And I will turn it over to Mr. Levchenko.
All right, so what we're talking about today are some related to actions that the prior council took in October of last year, which then, as all water and sewer plan amendments, went to the Maryland Department of the Environment for final action. And in March of this year, we did receive, final action letters. And I'm speaking both to the 10-year plan itself, which was one of the actions last year, as well as a number of category change requests, all but one related to those actions. So we're going to talk about them sort of in tandem. And then one other category change request that happened to be done at the same time, which we'll talk about. For the most part, the MDE approved the plan with consensus on most items. However, there were several policy changes that the prior council had made that MDE did disapprove or narrow, and that's what we're going to focus on today, and then the implications of that with several category change requests. And then I mentioned there was one other request, which I think we'll probably try to deal with first to get that out of the way, and then we're going to talk more about the policy issues. And I've got some slides just to keep us sort of on track. Let me get this. There we go. This committee and the council did deal with some category change requests earlier this year, but for the new council members, this is basically a new process. Mr. Glass, you've been here for a while and been through the cycle, and we're here for the 10-year plan update. But we have the other two members of the committee, as well as a number of other council members, have not. So I just have some very basic information just to sort of set the groundwork. First of all, the 10-year water and sewer plan that we're talking about today. I put on the slide here the rationale for it. It's encoded in state law. The jurisdictions, including Montgomery County, are required to comprehensively review the plan every 3 years and provide that update or any changes to the plan to MDE for action. That was the part of the action last fall, was part of that process. And then, as I mentioned, there were a number of requests that had been deferred pending that action, that once the council acted, they were approved consistent with the council's actions. So we're going to be talking about that more today. And I just went through this. The one thing I will note, and this is why we're here today, the state law also does note that the council has a 6-month time frame to request formal reconsideration by MDE of any disapprovals. So that's what we'll be talking about today. MDE is not required to actually take those up. It's at their discretion, but we are required within 6 months to respond to their disapproval, or it's just assumed to be accepted. So these are some of the prior actions I was mentioning. These were all approved back in October of last year. We had the 10-year plan update. And then the category changes. I'm going to mention the names because that's what's going to be coming up. Mm-hmm. We have the Aurora and Kapora requests. Those are going to be discussed in tandem because they were paired for reasons that will be obvious when we talk about them. Then we have the Inane request, and then TransQuest LLC and Travella Oak LLC. Those are also being discussed in tandem because they're also related to a policy issue that was discussed in the plan. All of these requests, the Aurora request actually was partially approved prior to this, but conditionally approved for a main extension, which is the issue here with Kapor. So that'll be discussed. The other ones were all conditionally approved based on the state approving the policy changes that we're talking about. And then one other request, which I want to get at first, the Mohave request. This is a property that had problems with their septic system. They brought that to the attention of the council, or the committee first, then the council. The council had or the committee had a lively discussion about it and felt supportive of the applicant's request to connect to sewer. That's how it was submitted to the state. The state denied the request because there was not a documented septic failure identified by the county. In this case, that would be our Permitting Services Department that would identify the failure and also recommend a long-term solution. So we did not have that as part of our approval to the state, and the state felt very strongly that was needed. So from staff's perspective, this is a bit more of a black and white issue. I don't see a value to submitting a reconsideration request for this. I think what we need to do is have our Permitting Services Department and DEP work more with the applicant to confirm the status of the septic system and what some potential solutions are on site, or if those turn out not to be feasible, to assist the applicant with submitting a request for a consideration for a public health problem exception.
Do we want to? Do you want to pause there and talk
Well,
about
and
that
I'll
one?
pause there. I will say I do have maps and other things if we need to look at some of the specifics of the requests. What I was not focusing on today was relitigating the requests. The council went through that process last year and decided how it felt about them.
Yep.
So what we're talking about today is if and how to decide on how to submit a reconsideration request for these.
Yeah, so appreciate you bringing everybody up to speed. I'll share with colleagues that Mr. Levchenko's recollection of a spirited, I think you said spirited or robust conversation was absolutely correct. I believe it was a split vote at the committee, and I was strongly in favor of the waiver, citing and having spoken with the homeowner and the problems that they were enduring. And I think with DEP and DPS, we were trying to work through what happened, and I think more importantly, what didn't happen. And what is concerning to me is that since that conversation, the state has denied the application because there wasn't follow-up from the executive branch. Is that correct? What has happened since our last conversation?
There's a number of attempts to get a hold of Mr. Mohebi, and he did not respond to us. So DPS and DEP has reached out to Mr. Mohebi a number of times to coordinate with him to go on the property, take a look at his system, and he has not responded to us.
So the same property owner who had contacted me and contacted a number of my colleagues a number of times about this problem, you're saying ghosted you and did not respond despite pleas for this request?
We can give you the times and the attempts that we tried to work with Mr. Mohebi.
I'm not sure how to proceed because it is dumbfounding me that we'd be in this position where someone is advocating very strongly for something, and in order to achieve that goal, there's no follow-through. And that's what you're saying. Okay. Councilmember Balcom.
So I understand that the clock is ticking, right? And when I spoke with Mr. Levchenko, I mean, there is a possibility that he's out of town or he's not getting whatever communication. So can we, I mean, I know that staff need time to prepare the appeal, but it's not as if we decide today, I mean, he has another 3 months, right?
Well, I think I want to step back with the Mohebi request. I'm not suggesting that we do a reconsideration for Mr. Mohebi. I think if we can get cooperation from Mr. Mohebi to have DPS and DEP assist him with confirming the status of his system, it's going to be ultimately a sort of a yes-no issue. Mm-hmm. Either the system can be dealt with on site and repaired, and this would be DPS's expert opinion that we would rely on, or that's not feasible and DPS recommends that the best long-term solution is to allow for sewer. If they do that, we have policies in place now, not requiring anything from the state, that would allow us to approve a category change request under current policies. The state's concern was that we had not followed that process to the letter. We had not gotten DPS, third party, if you will, confirmation of that failure and that there is not a feasible on-site solution. So I'm not suggesting that there's a clock ticking on Mr. Mohebi's request, just that we really need that next step to happen, that we really need DPS and DEP to be able to connect with him and confirm the status of the system.
So, for instance, if the septic failed, then we wouldn't have to go to the state, or we would have to request.
Well, we would still be approving a category change request for him. That category change request would go back to the state, but it would be consistent with our approved plan,
okay.
and we would be very confident that the state would be comfortable with that. The state's concern was that we did not have that documentation the first time around. The council felt comfortable based on what it had heard, and also, for some context, it's an unusual property, very oddly shaped property. It's a very unusual septic system that was creating problems for the applicant, and also, really did require a site-specific, analysis by DPS. And I don't know if DEP wants to talk more about it, but it's
Mr. Mohebi is here. I'd like to invite him up so that we could just get some clarity in the he said situation that we're faced with.
Sit there.
Thank you, sir. Council President, thank you for inviting me. I just happened to be here today because Alan emailed me regarding this committee meeting. My name wasn't mentioned in the email he sent. I didn't think my application was part of it, but just out of safety, I showed up. As you know, you were familiar with the case. It took us 2 years to get that application approved because of our septic failure and the drama that we have gone through. And the council voted 9-0 for the approval in October. I haven't heard anything from the county or MDE since that approval. I hired a company now that have been working and surveying the area and marking the streets, trying to figure out to apply to WSSC for the sewer plant to connection. So I've gone through the expenses even after the approval, and they told me they could start the process pending waiting for MDE to basically approve the approval of the council. I had never heard from anybody from MDE or the county. I just heard the gentleman mentioning that I have ignored calls or emails. I haven't received a single call or email from neither the county or the MDE. So as I mentioned, I've even hired a company who's working now on applying to the WSSC for the sewer connection. They have done all the paperwork. They have done the survey of the land, the streets. Everything is ready to be submitted. And today I'm really surprised to hear this.
I'm surprised too. And so, short of the T&E committee turning into Judge Judy, right? I don't know how we proceed here.
Yeah, I mean, we can follow up and document the times we attempted to contact Mr. Mohebi, but I mean, there has been attempts. I've been told there have been attempts to reach out to him, and that we have not been able to connect with him. And I could follow up with you and give you the times and the dates that we made those attempts. That's all I can offer. I don't know what else to say.
You have my email, you have my phone number.
Mr. Mohebi,
I have no record of that.
Do you have anything you want to
Yes. DPS staff did advise us that Mr. Mohebi was out of the country for several months right after this approval was granted, but they continued to, according to them, to contact him to try to arrange a site visit so that we could get a good handle on what's going on.
So I presume if someone's out of the country, there's an email or a phone log, right?
Yes, I would assume so.
You know, I have a business that I run, that I'm here 24 hours a day. I have not been out of the country for several months.
For my colleagues' edification, this was the reason we had a very spirited conversation 6 months ago. And I was frustrated by the situation then, which is why I strongly supported the waiver. I am frustrated by the situation now. I don't know what the miscommunication or lack of communication is. So I'm willing to write another letter to support the appeal, but I know that that will only mean as much as the Department of Permitting Services provides its recommendation. And there's no guarantee that you're willing to do that, because we've been talking about the need to better communicate, and there still is no communication. So I will support the appeal, and I apologize for this situation.
You haven't done anything to apologize. You have been supportive because you heard the entire process last 2 years, and you knew what the suffering that we have concurred with the brand new house we've bought, and ever since the beginning of moving there 3 months after we've had the issue. And as Keith mentioned, it's just the form of the land. The land is in two pieces. The septic field is 730 feet away, and it's been issue from the beginning because of the design.
So I'll turn it over to Councilmember Stewart in a second. But Mr. Lovchenko, what is the timeline here, the shot clock again?
For a reconsideration, we're talking, the notice of final action for Mr. Mohebi's request came in, I want to say around March 9th. Around that time, we have 6 months from then, which would be September. Given the council's recess schedule, we would probably need to get an appeal for Mr. Mohebi's request before the August recess.
Okay. So what I would like to request is that the email and phone records be provided to you, Mr. Lovchenko, from the executive departments no later than Friday, July 7th, taking into account the holiday. But this should be a very simple search, since it was either phone logs or email. Is that so? That is my request. Thank you. And then so that we can schedule full council if deemed necessary thereafter. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for showing up.
The only thing is, I would like to say that we will work with Mr. Mohebi. We do need to get DPS out to the site to make an evaluation. That still has to be done, or MDE is not going to approve it unless there is a documented sewer failure. So that's something that still needs to happen, that we will work with Mr. Mohebi to make sure that happens.
So how long does it take to schedule that?
I would think it could be within a week or two. I would have to. That would be done by DPS. Both we invited DPS, but both of the people that were involved in that are on vacation this week and couldn't be here. But we will coordinate with DPS and make sure it happens in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, because I would think after this hearing you could just check your calendars and figure something out.
Can you make sure they have correct contact information, please?
We'll get with you afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would. Hey, the timeline I gave was quite generous. I might want to, request that a visit be scheduled by next Friday. So let me be more explicit there, so that you provide the records of the communication, the council staff by next Friday, July 7th, and in that correspondence share the date that has been agreed and the time that has been agreed for the site visit to Mr. Mohebi's home.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And if necessary, if we are choosing to do a reconsideration letter from Mr. Mohebi, the other requests we're going to talk about, they came in a little bit later in March, so we do have the opportunity to push that into September if we have to. So they could go separately if they need to. So I did want to talk about the policies that MDE did take issue with in the 10-year plan, and then I'll talk about how those affect the category changes. We had first the abutting mains policy. There were two changes to that the council had recommended. or had approved and sent to MDE. One had to do with new main extensions, in which MDE approved narrower language, which we'll talk about, and then also a new policy within this to allow for the transfer of abutting mains rights, which MDE disapproved in whole. And then the other policy, which was also new for the council this year, was the commercial sewer service policy that they had created, and MDE had disapproved that policy as well. So first with the new main extensions, the abutting mains policy has been utilized numerous times over the years for category change requests. Most of the time, if there's no issue with it, we don't even see them. They can be approved administratively by DEP. As with many category change requests, the ones that the council sees have some issue with them that needs to be addressed. And we did have we had issues that arose with the Aurora and Kapora requests, which I had mentioned earlier, where the Aurora property abuts a main and was eligible for an approval, which could have been done administratively, most likely, but the applicant was also seeking a main extension as part of that, so to connect from a different location rather than from where the main currently ends. And if that main were to be extended as the applicant wanted, it would then abut the Kapoor property across the street. Mr. Kapoor had submitted a category change request seeking approval, but it would be contingent on the Aurora request getting approval for the extension. The council was sympathetic to Mr. Kapoor in his application. He was basically the last property on the block that was not served. The council was sympathetic to that and supported the concept of a main extension as part of the abutting mains policy with some guardrails which we added. And that's what ultimately the council approved. However, MDE, looking at this, narrowed its approval, and by narrowing it to only allowing connections like Mr. Kapoor's for failing septic systems, it basically took the Kapoor request out of the picture. It would not be, it could not be approved under the policy that MDE approved. And also, subsequent to that, or to the council's approval, the Aurora applicant withdrew their request. They were, I believe they're now considering potentially a re-subdivision or a subdivision on septic. So we have basically the Aurora request is moot, and the Kapoor request can't go forward without the Aurora request. So we have that, plus we have the state action which narrowed things. So staff's suggestion here is that we accept basically the MDE narrowed approval. It still provides some flexibility in certain environmental circumstances to do extensions. That's language we did not already have in the prior plan, so that could be of help at some point. But in terms of taking up the Kapoor issue, that will probably have to wait for another day, and a future amendment. So staff suggests not pursuing a reconsideration for the Aurora or Kapoor requests, or for the underlying policy. The other abutting mains related issue had to do with the transfer of abutting mains rights. As with the Aurora and Kapoor requests, this issue originated with a category change request a couple of years ago, the Anane request, where the applicant was seeking to connect a main to a outlot. The outlot does abut the main, but the outlot does not have the rights to connect to the main because it was part of a prior subdivision where another property had that single connection right. However, because the applicant is adjacent to that property, there is the potential that through a re-subdivision process, there could be effectively a transfer. Given that, staff also looked at, well, maybe it makes more sense to have some sort of rational transfer policy within the 10-year plan itself. So as part of the 10-year plan update last year, the committee and the council ultimately agreed on a fairly narrow transfer policy that would apply if this applicant would seek to pursue it, but likely would be fairly rare elsewhere in the county. It does require that the donating property have a fully functioning septic system that meets current requirements and reserve fields and everything else. So it would be very, very unlikely that that property in the future that was transferring its abutting mains rights would need sewer in the future or anytime soon. And it also would require that the property getting the system could be a buildable lot, that it did meet all the other requirements to be a buildable lot. So that's ultimately what the council supported to MDE. MDE expressed concerns about what we thought we had addressed. They expressed concerns that we could still end up with more building lots than were originally conceived under this policy, and felt there weren't enough assurances that would be limited, and also were concerned about how many other cases there might be that could work under this. I've noted in the packet staff's response to the MDE's issues. I think we could provide clarifying information to the state, I think that addresses their concerns, at least from staff's perspective. We can also do some research to confirm, as we think, that this would be a pretty rare circumstance and would not be leading to rampant redevelopment or development elsewhere. So under those conditions, and the fact that even apart from this, through a re-subdivision, the applicant could possibly achieve this anyway with fewer guardrails. Staff would feel more comfortable if we had it documented in the plan what hoops you have to go through to meet this. So if staff feels it is reasonable for us to try at least the reconsideration, if it doesn't work, then we're where we are now, where it's not been approved by the state. But I think we have a case to make here.
I thank you again for bringing us up to speed in those conversations from last year. I agree with the concept of having the guardrails in place, and think that makes sense and would be supportive of moving forward with staff recommendation. Yep.
So what we would do for this, since this is the first item that would require the format for the reconsideration would be a council president letter that would need to be approved by the full council. So based on this, staff will work with executive staff to respond to all the elements of MDE's concerns. We'll put that into a draft letter that will then go for a council work session in action.
Great.
The last item is the commercial sewer service policy. This issue first arose in discussions of the Travilla Oak and TransQuest LLC requests a couple of years ago, and I've got some slides and maps we can look at if we want to get into the detail of that request or those requests. Both the council and the planning board at the time were supportive of the concept. The applicants were seeking sewer in order to redevelop their commercial properties, and both the council and the planning board were supportive of the idea of redeveloping those sites to better serve the community, but recognized that there was not a policy in the existing plan that would allow that to happen. So staff was directed to try to work on a policy that would achieve that and provide sufficient conditions to also avoid unintended consequences. So staff did create a policy. Let's see. Oh yeah, it is included on this slide here. First and foremost, it would not apply in all zones. So a number of zones were excluded, including the ag reserve zone, the rural cluster, and the rural zone from this policy. Also, if there was a specific recommendation in a master plan that precluded the extension of sewer, we do have specific policies throughout the county, not just general policies, but literally specific policies excluding it, then the policy would not apply. Also, only commercial uses would be eligible under the policy. We base that on the definition of commercial in the zoning ordinance. they would be considered on a case-by-case basis by the council. They could not be administratively approved. The main extensions would have to be within public rights-of-way and avoid sensitive environmental features. And the main extensions could not promote additional development that was not otherwise eligible. And you might recognize some of these conditions are conditions that we have in the private institutional facilities policy. So that was somewhat a bit of guidance for us as to how to develop this policy. So with all those conditions, the council was supportive of that. These conditions would still be met by the TransQuest and the Travilla Oak requests. So those requests were conditionally approved at the same time that this policy was approved by the council. And that went to the MDE for action. MDE, and I also will note, the Maryland Department of Planning also provides guidance and recommendations to MDE as in looking at our plans. They expressed significant concerns about consistency with Thrive and our other general master plan policies.
Let me just check that for a sec. The state was questioning our vision of this this policy and Thrive.
Yeah, the state actually referred to Thrive and the county's general plan discussions and was concerned that some of the specific elements in this policy were not referenced in Thrive. And you know, we had staff discussions with the state and explained that Thrive is an overarching document and that it was intended to inform future master plans, which would then inform future zoning. So we have a lot of policies in the water and sewer plan that are not specifically referenced in Thrive. So I think we have a general concern with their methodology for how they looked at that. The other thing to note is these requests were actually approved almost at the same time. Thrive was approved by the council, the prior council last fall, and these requests were along the same track, approved by the same council. And in fact, a lot of the discussions referenced Thrive and the concept of 15-minute living and shorter drives and all that. The council's very
well
familiar with
aware
that.
what the policy is. Yes, another robust conversation. But curious to know that was invoked.
So I think, staff suggestion here, and we have some note in the packet as well, is about some feedback we received from the attorney for TransQuest and Travilla Oak. Certainly we can provide additional clarification to respond to their concerns. One of their, I would say their most substantive concern was that the commercial use aspect of this was too broad, that they felt that needed to be better defined. The council had talked about that, but it is a challenge to identify, well, what uses are appropriate and which are not. We felt better working off of what the current zoning ordinance definition for commercial was, but we can take another look at that. And also the attorney for the applicant had some suggested clarifying language as well that would also perhaps address some of their concerns. So my suggestion here is that staffs, as with the prior request, go through the issues MDE raised and make our best argument for why we feel that the request should be approved. And then also, to the degree we identify adjustments we can make to the policy that we think would address their concerns, we can include those in the draft letter and bring those to the council for discussion when you're considering a reconsideration.
Very good. Since
I think
the
DEP may want to
conversation about our general plan, I've now found it, on Circle 39 and 41 and in other places, and I appreciate them following our policy debates. But I think there is absolute consistency within the council regarding our growth and infrastructure policy, and this is part of it as well. And for those reasons, I would support writing another letter. I'll call it an appeal. And if we need to restate our commitment to our land use policies and to our general plan vision, I encourage the letter to include that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit about the conversation that the MDE and MDP said that, regarding these existing category changes, that they would be willing to reconsider them and work with us if we provide supporting data, but that in the future, that if there weren't changes made to either the water resources element, which is part of the general plan, or to Thrive, then we might have more trouble in the future approving them. So I'm just passing that statement on.
It sounds to me like they need to be educated on what Thrive is and what it isn't. There is no policy and zoning attached to Thrive. It is a visionary document that is going to inform the planning department, that will use it to create master plans, sector plans, and other types of zoning documents after public debate and after public hearings, and then comes over here to the council where we will go through the same public conversation.
Yeah, I would just encourage that get transmitted to MDE and MDP.
We will make sure to transmit it. Thank you. Thank you for enlightening us on their thoughts. I appreciate that. Okay, so I think we're all, are you?
I'm just wanted to talk about the timing of when all this happens, given the recess. So can you just walk through that?
Well, as I mentioned, with the Mojave request, I think it's too tight. It would have to be done prior to the recess. But we already have some guidance from the committee as to we want to move quickly on that. With the other requests, I think ideally we would get that done before the recess as well, but we have until later in September if we need additional time. That just would give us a little bit less turnaround time at the council. But the 6 months, the denials came to us in late March, so that's a late September 6-month time frame. And then, but Mojave came to us earlier in March, so that's an early September time frame. That's more problematic in terms of the recess.
And is it the council approves the concept, or does the council have to approve the actual letter and appeal?
Speaking with legal staff, we need the council to affirm that they are seeking reconsideration. So it's a full council action on a letter to be sent to the state.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking if we could do it before recess, that way we're not, if something goes awry at the end of September, then we're not stuck.
Right. We could certainly make that our goal, and certainly with Mojave, we would have to, I think. But yeah, that would be our goal to try to get all of this wrapped up before the recess.
We can work on the agendas. Okay. Great. Good point. I think that's it.
That's all we have.
That's it. That's all we have. Appreciate the conversation. Look forward to getting the update from relevant staff by next Friday on the communication that occurred and on learning what date the department will go visit the property owner, Mr. Mojave's home, so that we can conclude this situation. And with that, thank you all for all of today's afternoon conversations, and we're adjourned.